afternoon, and I appreciate the introduction, although I'm not quite sure how warm it was. I will also say I'm very much a conversationalist. Those of you who have heard me speak before, I wander a lot, I never use PowerPoint because I never stick to the PowerPoint, and drives people crazy in the audience, so I decided just to abandon that. I think over lunch or right after lunch, I think PowerPoint is a little tough to digest anyway. I will also say I am a little concerned that I may be the subject of the next cartoon, and I sure hope not. Perhaps during the talk we can find some content for the cartoonist as we move forward. Again, hopefully without my picture on it. So we have about a half an hour, 40 minutes or so together this afternoon, and I'm going to walk you through sort of not quite a day in the life, but sort of what's going on relevant to what it is an audience like this would like to hear about. Both sort of information technology. You heard a lot of words in my bio, like architecture and technology and automated information systems, and I do a lot of that day to day. I am not the CIO of the organization. I am the Deputy Chief Management Officer. And for those of you who had the pleasure to listen to David Walker when he was the Comptroller General for years, was on a path to establish at the Defense Department a second deputy for management, because it was so important in his both mind and heart that the department have somebody dedicated full-time to the management of the organization, the business space, because we are such a big organization that I think where we landed, if you will, with the Congress was establishing or solidifying our Deputy Secretary as the Chief Management Officer. Frankly, also, I'm sure this room is aware, the GIPRA Modernization Act requires the federal agencies to establish a Chief Operating Officer, very similar to a Chief Management Officer, and that will be Secretary Lynn for us in DoD. And also, you heard, the Performance Improvement Officer. I am the Performance Improvement Officer for the department, and again, I'm going to walk through why all of that is important and why we put it in, we DoD put those roles and functions in this separate office. I started to say that the middle ground we landed on with Congress was the establishment of a Deputy Chief Management Officer. If the Secretary of Defense, the Deputy Secretary is going to be the Chief Management Officer, he will need somebody helping him every day who wakes up and says, what's happening in the back office? I care about it, I live it, and we're watching it, and we're not just watching one aspect of it, it's in its totality, and I'll walk through a little bit of that. So it is a Senate-confirmed position, so I am the first in that position. It was somewhat of a transition for me, being a member of the Defense Department. I've been a career civil servant for 20-some-odd years. It's a little fuzzy. I don't ever give the exact number because people start doing the math, I stay away from that. But it is a very different culture, and I think it is extremely important that we have a position. It's an undersecretary level position within the Department of Defense, and so I'm at the table, and that's also very important. And as you all know, if you want to enable, again, back office business outcomes to happen, then you have to have the whole corporation there at the table with you. The way we're organized in the Defense Department is very functionally focused. Acquisition, technology, and logistics. We have the HR people, we have finance, our Undersecretary Comptroller, our Undersecretary of Personnel and Readiness. And so we are very functionally organized, and so the integration point for us happens at the Deputy Secretary level. And that's tough when you're living in an organization as big as DoD. We run I think we're the largest single healthcare provider. We're a multi-billion-dollar global supply chain organization. I think we are the 16th largest country in the world. If you look at the dollars, if you will, there's, depending on how you count and who you count, somewhere between 3 and I'll say 3.8 million people. And so how do you manage an extremely complex organization like defense? And do it in a way that enables transparency and collaboration and all these other things that we talk about every day. And how do you manage all of this, again, at the appropriate level, using federation and things like that. So that's somewhat of a contextual background around sort of what does my office do, and then what is the focus day to day. We do have very much a synchronization, integration function across the Defense Department. Again, the business space, that's where I live every day. Clear touch points within with the CIO shops. I'll say because there's a super strong relationship that we have to have. And so what I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about today is some of the IT-related priorities that both the Deputy Secretary and the Secretary have. I mean, it's no secret that our Secretary launched, if you will, efficiency initiatives that were incorporated in the 2012 budget. I am partnered with our comptroller organization to then track and manage did we actually achieve the efficiencies that we said we were going to? Again, taking a broad look around how we're managing the overall defense enterprise. If I was to articulate some of the priorities of the Deputy Secretary and the organization, sort of IT in general seems to be a much louder conversation today than it has been in the past. Frankly, all of what I fondly refer to as the back office. How are we organized? How do we execute? How do we manage what we do every day? And I'm going to come back to that in a second. IT acquisition reform and our IT enterprise strategy, so it's the infrastructure piece, data center consolidation, those kind of things, and also how do we acquire the applications that we want to ride on the net. I am the lead for the department, trying to pull all of the various organizations together to come up with a consolidated approach, and we'll talk about that. I understand there's potentially a lot of interest in this room about what's going on with the electronic health record. I have the opportunity also to be very much in the front of the conversation there within the department. Our department working very closely with our partners at Veterans Affairs. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm sure there's a question or two out there. I do want to leave time for that. But if I was to step back and say, how do you approach this huge enterprise, as was mentioned in my introduction, the strategic management plan, you have to have a strategy. So if you talk about strategy, policy, process, information technology to include data, and then the culture piece of how you do what you do, and I would include measures in there as well. And so the strategy piece, we just updated the quadrennial defense review. That is the strategic plan for the department. If anybody has had the opportunity to read it, it's a very comprehensive document focused on the core mission of the Defense Department, which is a warfighting national security mission. Our job in the business space is to ensure that we're positioned to enable that the most efficient and effective way we possibly can. So in the main strategic document of the department, yes, there is a chapter that talks about what we should be focused on from a business perspective. Export control, cyber, those kind of things are articulated, but the more detailed strategy comes in the strategic management plan where we articulate our business priorities. So you have priorities, then you have initiatives, how am I going to make those happen, and what are the measures I'm going to use. Measures are interesting, they're not exciting to too many people. Because it's becomes a data collection exercise. There's too many. They're too cumbersome. It's just numbers, and nobody cares. And so what we're trying to ensure that we do is identify those that really matter and make a difference. Are you measuring the right things? We know how to measure. I would submit that everybody in this audience has a strategic plan wherever it is you work. Would that be true? Yes, absolutely. We have a strategic plan. How many people use it? There's usually a smaller number, and then it's the measures, right? And again, I'm a program management type. I love structure. I like to follow the plan. I was born for DoD, because that's what we like to do. But if, again, it's too much and unwieldy and uninformative, then you lose interest. And so we're trying to ensure that we're identifying the key initiatives that meet those strategic goals and objectives. Again, what are the business outcomes you're trying to achieve by implementing that ERP or by changing your process somewhere. And then how do you know that you're making any progress? I mean, that's what measures are all about, right? And this isn't a measures lecture for sure, but it's to convey the importance of them, getting them right, and then using them as a management tool. And so again, if you look at strategy, I mentioned policy and process. I think in my bio you heard, I actually run the department's Lean Six Sigma office. Anybody a Lean zealot in here? Couple. I'm a green belt. Yes, there's one. I'm a green belt. I think the math is too difficult for me. All the standard deviations get that black belt. But I love people who do this because, as you all know, especially in a room like this, if you don't understand how you are doing what you want to do, you'll enable an IT, right? You'll put the IT in place and you go, oh, I wonder why that didn't work. Well, okay, let's take a step back. What outcome, what business outcome were you trying to achieve? Did you actually think through the process that you need to put in place to make that happen? And then what policies are in your way in terms of enabling better outcomes? Security clearance process, I do want to shout out to the DoD team for, we actually took something off the CIO high-risk list, first time ever in 22 years or 25 years. That took just effort, but I was absolutely focused. And the reason I bring that up here is we took a very process-oriented perspective on how do we do what we do and what drives our behavior. Policy drives behavior. Again, it's one of those exciting things like metrics, right? Let's look at all the policies we have in place and let's rationalize them. Oh, pick me. I mean, I don't want to do that. But let me tell you, it is much easier to buy the app, right? Buy the app. But if you don't actually go through the, how do I do what I do, and what's driving my behavior in terms of policies, your app's not going to achieve the business outcomes you want. It won't. I love this example because in the security clearance process, and by the way, I didn't know anything about the process. I know it took a long time, and I was asked to try and fix it again. They took it out of the functional hands and gave it to somebody like me, who knew nothing. I'm not a functional expert at all, but I understand the steps you need to go through. We found out that the federal investigative standards, which all of those who do background investigations, they had been around since the times of J. Edgar Hoover. I had to look him up, right? and so you say, well, why is that? Well, is it because we have people who are just saying, I have to, these are the best standards going? No, they just used what was there. Right? They didn't question the status quo. They used the existing policies. We never said, well, is that a good idea? Is it relevant anymore? If you don't actually take a look at your policies, because they'll just continue to grow. It's like the stuff you put in that drawer in the kitchen, right? Stuff, it just accumulates. Policies are like, they just accumulate. So you actually have to go through the drawer from time to time and say, well, do I still need that? Is it providing any value to this sort of the business outcome I'm trying to achieve? And if the answer is no, it's a policy. You can just get rid of it. It's not a statute. And if there are some things that exist from a statutory perspective, Congress is a great partner. You have a conversation with them. They too want to achieve those business outcomes. And so to me, right, the strategy, you got to know where you're going. The process piece is extremely important. But you have to sort of lift up, because you can do process analysis till the cows come home, and some do. Like you never get out of the analysis phase. You have to just say, hey, time box it. I'm going to give so many days to do this. I'm going to get it done, identify those policies that are in the way or that we like or whatever they are. And then figure out, what's the new thing look like? And then how am I going to measure that it's actually making a difference? That's where the measurement piece comes in. The intelligence IRTPA gives us all kinds of reporting requirements from a metrics perspective. I can tell you how much faster, but you can't, exchange speed for quality. We still have to have quality. And so again, we picked those measures that were important, that were relevant to the conversations, and to enable the outcomes that we wanted. And we got rid of all the other stuff. And that's the important piece. I give that as an example because when we're looking in the business space within the Defense Department, we're looking at all of those things. By the way, once you figure out the new process, I have to say, you have to document it somewhere. You have to write it down. And that's the value of the enterprise architecture. We have the federal enterprise architecture. DoD's got the architecture. In the business space, we have the business enterprise architecture. That's where we write it all down, right? All the policies we're going to keep, the processes we're going to use, the systems that we keep, those that don't belong in our future state. We identify what those are, and then we put them on a glide path for sunsetting. That's the politically correct term. You're getting rid of a system. You sunset. Because we don't ever kill anything, right? But it's the holistic approach to how you doing what you do. And again, I live in the back office, and I really feel that those who live here and where IT is an enabler to these outcomes, we have a super strong responsibility. Again, in defense, our core mission is, it is so super clear. I understand what the core mission of the Defense Department is. And for half of my time there, I worked for the Department of the Navy on the sort of weapons system side. And I will tell you, going to the firing range, the missile firing range, watching whether or not the countermeasures worked, was really cool during live fire tests, right? When I came to the business side and we're looking at implementing a financial system, there we are during test, and the transaction went through, and when it posted properly to that standard general ledger, there were high fives everywhere. Right? So I say that because I understand the importance of the back office getting it right. We have a fiscal responsibility, frankly, everybody in this room is a taxpayer to understand how we execute our dollars. We have a responsibility to those, our military members, that their pay is right every time, that nobody has to worry about, was the entitlement calculation done right? It should be right every time. It's like flipping the light switch. There's an expectation that light comes on. There's an expectation, and what we owe our military members is that pay is right, that equipment is delivered where it's supposed to be, when it's supposed to be, they have the training that he or she needs. And again, I say this because sometimes it's easy to lose focus on the back office because that is not the core mission of the department, but it is such a huge enabler where we spend so much both time and money that we need to get it right, and we need to look at ways to become more efficient and effective. And so the policy process, right, information technology is my next kind of thing, if you will, on my little walk around. Information technology, to me, it also includes data and infrastructure, right? At the end of the day, it's all about the data and the management information with which to make decisions. I mean, it's so easy to say. But go back to my J. Edgar Hoover example and the policy that existed so long. When's the last time you looked at all that data? Right? It grows over time exponentially, and then we have stuff that we put it on, and we put it somewhere. Again, it's figuring out what data do we need to use. Go back to the business process, right? What data that needs to flow through, again, to enable the business outcome. What management information is needed? What do you need to make those decisions? So the approach we're taking, again, as we're looking at the information technology, in particular in the business space, because that is where like I said, I live every day. What are the data requirements to then serve up that management information? Because at the end of the day, it really truly is all about that data. How we serve it up, what context we put, the whole discussion around primitives and ontology and referential implementations. I mean, all of that is so important because it defines how we intend to talk about that piece of information in the context of the business space. But again, there's a handful of people who love it, and then there's another handful that don't understand it. And it's bringing the functional and the technology community together, along with what I'll call corporate, to say we collectively are in this game together. And so as we approach these, we have multiple enterprise resource planning initiatives, programs within the Defense Department. I think there's right now 12 or so. We're taking a very corporate approach to them, looking at the data, the infrastructure they ride on, how they're implemented. It's not just the functionals, it's the functional plus the corporate plus the technology folks to say, hey, are we collectively pursuing these the way we need to? And then the last sort of piece on the walkabout there is the culture. Touched on that a little bit already. I've said 1,000 times, this change stuff would be so much easier if we could just eliminate the people. I get lots of emails with different messages when I say things like that, because the change is the hardest. And I'll segue into the IT acquisition sort of reform efforts that we're doing. We did have a Congress said, hey, do it differently. We recognize IT is different than weapons systems. We do too, which is good. And we also recognize that we have different types of information technology that we're trying to deliver. So we have services, the business stuff I've talked a little bit about, largely ERP, COT space. Then we have the command and control. We should not be applying in DoD, we use an acquisition process codified in a DoD directive, the DoD 5000. It is our acquisition Bible. I know it well. On the weapons side, that's what I did, that's what I do. But when you buy a COTS package to then configure to meet the business needs of the organization, there is no requirement for a live fire test. Right? And there is no requirement to ensure that the technology is mature. We do technology readiness levels. It's a requirement by statute on our major defense acquisition programs to ensure that we've got sufficient maturity in our technology before we go to deploy it. Very important on that side. It doesn't really fit on when you're buying an ERP and trying to implement it. But should you look at different things, like is the infrastructure ready to ingest, if you will, this ERP, and have you thought through that whole, how is it going to work within its larger environment? Those are different kinds of things that aren't statutorily required, but that we're trying to infuse in the acquisition process. So our CIO is driving an IT enterprise strategy that looks at how is the infrastructure set, where are the opportunities to more streamline and standardize the approach to infrastructure. Data center consolidation is part of that. We're also, from the IT acquisition reform, looking at, and then how do I buy the capability better than I do today? I mentioned the 5,000. We set up work groups. We looked at, is funding an inhibitor? We have multiple appropriations. Would it be better? Could we have more flexibility with a single IT appropriation? Is something that the 25, we're very aligned with where OMB is both going and trying to go with their 25-point plan. So in fact, I was just up there yesterday talking to them about the IT appropriation. We're very interested in enabling that to happen. We'll take extreme partnering with Congress and also a lot of transparency. There's a trust but verify factor there, and we certainly acknowledge that because it's different than how we do today. We're looking specifically at test and evaluation and certification and accreditation. Today, 2 separate processes done by separate organizations. Testing can take anywhere from, 6 months to a year. Certification and accreditation, everybody says takes a year. That's ridiculous. That is a year and longer for you to field your capability than probably is necessary. So we're combining those. We're also looking at greater utilization of a development test bed so that you've actually tested it in the environment before you then field it. So there's a level of certification that will happen as you're, if you will, configuring and building the application that you're looking at. Portfolio management is another area that we're very much focused on. Again, I mentioned the 3 types of information technology. In the business space, we are looking at more of the, how does this thing fit within my overall business environment? ERPs off the shelf are cross-functional. I mentioned the way we're organized today is very functionally focused. We're saying, no, everybody in the room, and we're going to make decisions on the business apps together, so that if I buy an ERP, I can do multiple functions. Again, all within the federal acquisition regulations. I want to make sure I say that out loud, because I do know there's press in the room, and I want to get that exactly right. So those are, we're also looking at the requirements piece. I think every single solitary study, and there have been over 300, that says, boy, if you don't get the requirements right, it's not going to work. Yet, how many programs, and I oversee a bunch, we're figuring out the requirements as we go. And when you do that, it's 5 years and you haven't reached your initial operational capability, and then there's a next report to Congress that says, here's why I didn't do that. And it really is because I think partly a cultural issue, at least within defense, that says, well, we have one bite at the apple, right, to buy our thing, and so I'm going to put all my stuff in there. It doesn't lend itself very well to delivering sort of incremental capability. And so that to me puts the department on its side, not in a bad way, but in a good way, that says, hey, I want to deliver stuff as quickly as I possibly can. And if I don't change my thought process, meaning this is my only bite, then it's going to be a lot more difficult. We're also looking at delivering, we say 12 to 18 months. I think OMB is looking at 6 to 12 months in terms of their rapid delivery of capability. I think a lot of that conversation also depends on when you start the clock, and then what locks in those requirements. And for us, that's extremely important. We're taking a pilot-based approach that says, these are great ideas, and on PowerPoint, there's greater agreement because you don't have to actually do it. It's when we actually get into the doing that you see the sort of the status quo cultural pieces come out. And so we are taking a pilot-based approach. The Air Force financial system is the first out of the chute, and then we have 2 integrated first pay solutions that we're also posturing, again, looking at the different methodologies. We do expect to, this summer, publish guidance. All of the lessons learned from the piloting that we do to then publish our guidance for, at least our first iteration of our guidance for the different approach to acquisition. I feel like how am I on time? Okay? Okay. So I'm going to mention a little bit about electronic health records, because I do know that it's an item of interest. I think it has been published that recently both there have been 2 meetings between Secretaries Gates and Shinseki about how could we collectively deliver electronic health record capability together. And because at the end of the day, we have the same population set, right? It's the military member. I'm going to take a step back, because we are when these military members, when we first get them, if you will, it's through the accessions process. And go back to my, we're looking at, we're looking at end-to-end processes. I'm going to spend 30 seconds on that, because that is the framework that we're using within defense to say, how do I do what I do, and then what are the apps that I need to deliver that capability. So we are taking a very much an end-to-end approach. There are 15 commercial processes that we've documented in our business enterprise architecture: hire to retire, procure to pay, order to cash. You probably know them better than I. Procure to pay and hire to retire are our two top priorities, largely because we have a lot of investment that we plan to make in systems and capabilities, electronic health record being part of hire to retire, because that is when the member receives medical assistance throughout their life cycle. But then you have to say, well, when do we first capture that individual? And it is in the accessions process. And so I want to make sure that I've defined the data element that I want to use to track that military member throughout his or her life cycle at the very, very beginning. So I said, well, I'm going to talk about a little, VA, DOD doing this electronic health record thing. But if we don't, on the defense side, ensure that we lock the data elements back here and connect the accessions process to, like, pick one, health is a good one, such that it flows throughout their life cycle. So we're looking at when do we capture them first and feed that into, if you will, the electronic health record process, which is fundamentally different, I would submit, than we've done things before. Typically, like I said, the finance people do the finance thing, the PNR folks do the PNR thing, and we're saying, no, this is everybody in, and it's end-to-end, and we're going to do it right. So it's very much a data-driven, standards-based approach to then delivering the technology that will enable these things to happen. And so what the departments, so far have agreed to is exactly that, taking a data-driven, standards-based approach. There are standards, there are international standards that exist today. We have standard data within the Defense Department. VA has agreed to adopt, if you will, the DoD standard. Again, they are all aligned to the international standards that exist through the National Library of Medicine and others, so that we understand where we're going, and we're not going there for the short term, we're going for there in the long term. That way the data, if you will, is a seamless flow from whether or not you're being serviced from the Defense Department or VA. And anymore, we're trying to enable much more service being provided at either of the organization's hospitals. We also decided we take very much a common approach to the architecture. So there's the data, again, we're joint common architecture, again, looking at a very lightest footprint as we possibly can, ensuring that we have the right security controls in place. Data center consolidation too. We're looking to put all the data in a single place so that, again, the military member, it's seamless for them. And then there's the common presentation layer, if you will. In a room like this, you understand what GUI means. That is not true for every room I go in. Or people start sort of looking at their shoes, which is a really bad joke, but I've been there. Again, it's a common, how do I present the information in a common way to either a DoD doctor or a VA doctor? It should not matter. Again, standard data driven by a common presentation layer. And then there's the question about then, what about the apps? That seems to be sort of the, how are you going to acquire the apps and what about those? We certainly are, we have identified opportunities already from an application perspective. One organization or the other has some capability they use today. We're putting together, again, a very incremental approach to how would I deliver those applications, again, aligned to the common architecture that we've agreed to. Governance is key. You have to have strong governance. Any organization has to have strong governance and buy-in from all the stakeholders. Certainly the level of complexity goes up anytime you add more members. I think we all know that. But I think I'm positive both organizations are committed to drive and end-to-end as we discussed. I mentioned a lot about the business process re-engineering. I will tell you that I mentioned the data piece. We are doing the business process re-engineering piece. Again, such that we've got standard procedures in defense and in the VA so that there is a common approach to, I'll pick pharmacy. Right, whether mail order, in person, that we have a common business practice. And so that is fundamental also to the approach that we're taking. So standards-based, data-driven, common light architecture, centralized data, if you will, with a business process approach, with a common front end. Everybody's really excited about it. It will be very difficult to do, but again, it is the right thing to do. Achieves the business outcome that we want for the customer here. The customer here is the military member. And, like I said, both organizations are extremely committed to it. With that, I think I can take a question or two. Just want the easy ones. There's a question here.
Yes, Leslie from CSC. Obviously, both departments have been working towards modernizing their EHRs, and DoD has their MHS way ahead. How do you see the EHR integrated system working together, impacting your current plans on the MHS side?
So it's interesting you have the IEHR acronym already, because I don't think I mentioned that. We are both organizations. We're on a modernization path that was not synchronized, is I guess an okay way to say it. We have folded everything into this way ahead. And so, again, governance is key. Within the Defense Department, we said anything related to electronic health record activities, to include some of the stabilization efforts we've got going on, and the virtual lifetime electronic record, which both organizations are piloting with the private sector. All of it's coming into, if you will, the single governance acture. So we're looking at all of it, so that we do have a more holistic look at all of our activities. So it is aligned. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Denise Pearson with Input. A couple of weeks ago, Terry Chikai spoke at one of our events, and everything's about cloud. Thank you. And she basically said that if DoD were to really implement cloud to a broad degree right now, basically it would destroy the earth, is kind of what she said, around it would make the world worse, not better. And because of the lack of standardization, I was wondering if there are key areas of the IT environment now that have been identified as priorities for standardization in order to leverage cloud computing in the near term.
So I think we're always looking for opportunities to optimize, and also there are nearer term things that can be accomplished and some that will take more focus. I am much more conversant in the business space, and I can tell you that from a financial auditability perspective, we're looking at what are the standard financial information system, what are the financial standards that they need. As I'm pursuing ERP or solutions for integrated first pay, I need to understand military, human resource, enterprise standards. We are working those standards right now. Electronic health record, I've mentioned, there are already international standards, but it's then the compliance to those standards. You have to have them tight enough so that you can aggregate data at the end of the day, but loose enough so that people can comply. I'm going to say that usually in standards there shouldn't be a middle ground, and if you allow too much flexibility, then you can't aggregate. But again, in the business space, I think those are the short list of standards priorities. But I don't. I think we're looking at all of the standards and to say, well, do we have them, or do we have gaps within our site picture in terms of what do we need to then drive where we want to go. And if you just talk standards, if you just talk cloud, if you just talk infrastructure, I mean, you're only having part of the conversation. You need everybody in the room to talk about the whole thing together. Do I have all the piece parts in place to enable the business outcome? And it really is what business outcome are we trying to achieve? And then who do we need in the room to enable that conversation to happen? And again, I think it's extremely exciting, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity. And also, I see the sort of the friendly hook here to my right. I want to take the opportunity to thank you for allowing me to come today. I hope it was sort of helpful and useful. I'm exhausted, but had a great time, and again, I wish you all a very good day. So thank you very much.
This is extremely insightful. We certainly appreciate all the progress that you've been making, and appreciate the challenges as well. Okay, so that'll wrap it up for our luncheon, and will everybody just please proceed to the Independence Room, correct, for the next panel. Thank you.